In this session, we will first cover some basic CMDB concepts, followed by a demo using ServiceNow. Now, there are two terms that we want to get familiar with. One is what is a CI or a configuration item, and that will lead us to know a little about CMDB. So, a configuration item or a CI is basically anything you want to manage in your environment. This could be a server, a laptop, a database, or even a business service. Now, each CI has attributes like its host name, location, or support group, and also other CIs that are connected to it. For example, a database CI may be hosted on a server CI, or you could have an application CI that depends on a database CI. Okay, so that was about configuration item. Now, what is a CMDB? Now, CMDB or the Configuration Management Database is a central repository that stores information about all the assets and configuration items in your IT environment. In ServiceNow, CMDB is critical for the IT service management because it provides visibility into the infrastructure and relationships between components. This visibility supports better decision making for incidents, problems, and changes, and also helps out with compliance and audits. In ServiceNow, all CI records are stored in tables that extend the base table called the CMDB underscore CI. For example, the CMDB underscore CI underscore servers or the CMDB CI DB instance for databases and so on. So in your diagram, you would see at the top the CMDB CI class, followed by two children, the hardware and the application, and they are known as CI hardware or CMDB CI application, and then its own children. Okay. Now there is a table inheritance that ensures that all the CIs share common attributes while allowing specific classes to have specialized fields. Now the relationships between CIs are also stored in another table known as the relationship table, and they're not directly inside the CI record itself. That adds to flexibility and also reusability. Now we will have a small demo and we will focus on one particular CI. I've just picked up the Linux server CI, and we will cover some basic info about the CI. What about some attributes, the identification and reconciliation rules, and the general health. So we'll just look into what all CMDB lets you have preview into of a particular CI. Okay, so let me switch to ServiceNow. So here I have my ServiceNow. So I've selected configuration as my application, and I'm going to CI class manager. Okay, and so immediately I have got a welcome page. I will click on this hierarchy button here. Let me go and unplug this navigation and you get a better scope. So now I will search. So here, as soon as you see this hierarchy, you see that there are around, on the top, you have configuration items. That's your base class that we saw in the previous slide. You have around so many instances of CI. And then underneath, you got this hierarchy. Okay, so if I click on the cluster, there are 5 clusters defined. And beneath that, there are other types available. Okay, so let us search for the Linux server. Okay, so here immediately I'm presented with that same hierarchy that we saw in the previous slide. You have hardware, there are 901 instances of hardware. Then you got computer, then you got 40 servers, and then we have 4 Linux servers. Okay, and we will look into those four in a bit. But here I am presented with some information. So let's look into the basic info tab. It gives you some basic information. If I click on the attributes, I see that there are 118 attributes, of which there are 117 that have been derived from the parent. That means from that hierarchy of CI hardware, computer, and server, I've got 117. And this class itself, that is the Linux server, adds only one attribute that is known as a kernel release. Okay, so it gives me that breakup. Okay, overall, it has got 118 attributes. Now, coming to identification rule. Now, what is identification rule? Identification rules tell ServiceNow how to uniquely identify this CI during data imports or discovery. See, for example, it may be using a serial number or an IP address to make sure that we don't have duplicate entries of the same server. So in this particular case, they've got 5 rules defined here. So they would compare against the product instance identifier. And based on these checks, it will decide whether it is a CI that already exists, in which case you want to do an update, or you want to create a new instance of a Linux server CI. Okay. Now coming to reconciliation rules, they help us decide which data source wins when multiple systems update the same CI. For example, if your discovery says that the server has 16 GB RAM, but your Microsoft SCCM tool says there are 8 GB, then reconciliation rules will decide which one to trust. Okay, so that's to do with the reconciliation. Give me a minute. Okay. Finally, let's check into, give me a minute, sorry. Finally, let's check into let's get into this health related items. Now here we have completeness, compliance, and correctness. So completeness you can check how many of these mandatory fields are all the mandatory fields filled in from a CI perspective, what level of how much of it is complete, or from a correctness perspective, you can decide does it is the data accurate? For example, is the IP address valid? So those checks you can have. With regard to compliance, does it meet the CI's organizational standard? For example, does it have the right naming convention? So that gives you, from a health perspective, you can report a healthy CI improves reporting and makes the impact analysis more reliable. So let's do one thing. Let's look into the 4 instances that we saw earlier, and I'll pick one of them, the Linux 100 instance. And here I'm presented with some basic information of this particular Linux server instance. And I also see there's a downstream relationship and upstream relationships that is built in. Okay. And for that, I need to click on the open in the CMDB workspace, which I've opened here. Okay, so that again gives you some information about some attributes. Are there any incidents? What are the change requests that has come on this particular CI thus far? Again, it shows you the infrastructure relationship here. And you could open the dependency view, which I've opened here. So if you look at this, coming back to this diagram, it says that there are 3 upstream CIs. Okay, one is a Linux, Apache Linux, and that Linux server. And then there are 2 services. There is a bond trading service and a client services. And if you click on this down arrow, you see that the bond trading service is used by another service known as IT service. So these are the way, once you have defined this, you could also see that in a hierarchical manner here. That's your Linux server, Linux 100. And then you have a web server here running Apache. You have got 2 services, client service and bonding. And then we saw this thing that this is being used by your IT service. So what we have done is that we have picked a particular CI. We have gone through some basic information. what is identification and reconciliation rules, the health of it, and then also we saw the dependency. Okay, so coming back to my slide. So the Linux server CI gives you a complete view of a single server from basic details and technical attributes to identification rules and data quality. So in this way, CMDB ensures that every IT asset or infrastructure component is well documented and is useful across your IT processes. So that was a brief demo of CMDB and its usage as in ServiceNow. Thank you.